Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have two amazing guests to reintroduce to you now. Dr. Chris Knobbe and Suzanne Alexander are both returning guests on our show. Be sure to check out Dr. Knobbe's first appearance on episode 73 and 459 of our podcast. Suzanne Alexander has appeared more recently on episode 541 of Boundless Body Radio. Dr. Chris Knobbe is an ophthalmologist and Associate Clinical Professor Emeritus, formerly of the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, Texas. Dr. Knobbe has a deep interest in general nutrition, particularly as it relates to chronic degenerative disease, although his primary area of expertise is with the disorder called age-related macular degeneration, or AMD for short, and the connection between seed oils and chronic disease. Suzanne Alexander is a multi-award-winning educator with over 30 years of experience in the classroom. She is also a highly accomplished health and nutrition researcher with over 40 years of research to her credit. She is the executive director of public relations and philanthropy at the Ancestral Health Foundation and the Cure AMD Foundation. Suzanne is the co-author, along with Dr. Knobbe, of their newly released book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution: How Vegetable Oils and Processed Foods Destroy Our Health and How to Recover. They have recently embarked on an amazing journey to literally some of the most remote places on the planet to discover all of the roots of our human health. And it is such an honor to welcome back Dr. Chris Knobbe and Suzanne Alexander.
Hi, Casey. Hi, Dr. Knobbe.
Thank you, Casey. Appreciate you having us on.
You guys made it.
It's proud to be here again, Case.
You made it. You did it. So
Yeah, we made it.
We're
We
live.
survived.
We actually tried to record this episode a few weeks ago that would have been a little bit more recent to you guys arriving. But Chris, I know you came back and you were not feeling great. And Suze had a mountain of work. It was just way too aggressive to try to push into that. Suze, when you were telling me your travel plans, I told you needed to start your own travel agency and book trips for people because that is clearly your gift to this world. To see your Instagram photos of every airport and airplane and all these random places you actually were. It's like these guys lived in airports and airplanes. It's crazy.
It's so true.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
We were in airports an awfully lot. It was, it took a toll, but it was so worth it. It was so worth it.
Well, I cannot wait to hear about this. Suze, you kind of queued this up a few weeks ago when we hosted you on our show, and you told us about the journey. We said you were going to bring you guys back on to kind of talk about it. So I don't know where you guys want to start to jump in, but we've got an hour to hear about this amazing journey. I'm so excited to help share what you guys learned with the world. It's going to be amazing.
Thanks so much for having us on, Case. This means everything. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So, well, I'll just say, briefly that we took on this endeavor to what we called a preliminary investigation or an expedition to the South Pacific Islands and also to Wamena, West Papua, Indonesia, and I'll just tell you briefly, what our goals were is we went to West Papua, Indonesia to see the Dani tribe. It's spelled D-A-N-I, and this tribe is a tribe that lives almost exclusively off of sweet potatoes. They're very, very similar to the Papua New Guineans of Tucacenta that Professor Sinnott and White researched way back in the 60s and early 70s that I've talked about. So we saw them. From there, we went to Solomon Islands and then to Samoa. And finally, we went to Vanuatu, yeah. And then Fiji. So our goals primarily with Solomon Islands and Samoa were to evaluate the food supply, because as you know, Casey, we've been working on this hypothesis that it is the seed oils that are the primary drivers of overweight, obesity, diabetes, and a whole lot of other chronic disease. And but we were very suspicious about the data that we could get from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO, because that data, which was up through, I think, 2012, showed that they really had almost no vegetable oils But with their extreme rates of obesity and diabetes, especially in Samoa, we wanted to evaluate the food supply and find out if that was true. We'll come back to that. And then, so with Vanuatu, we went there primarily just to evaluate one tribe that's ancestrally living. And we had plans to go to Tana, which is a territorial island of Vanuatu, but the plane would never took off, so we missed that destination. So this was about a 3-week trip that we were on, and it was pretty hard trip. I ended up with a knee problem, which I think is I've got it was climbing a mountain near Wamena, West Papua, Indonesia. We took a long hike up the mountain to see how they made salt, and this was probably a trek that was maybe 1,200 to 1,500 feet up, but it was pretty treacherous by my standards. But anyway, I came down with a knee problem from that, and it was hard. It's hard getting from one island to another. It's typical to need 4 or 5 plane trips to get from, for example, Solomon Islands to Samoa. I think was 4 or 5 plane trips, and basically a day and a half. And we spent in this, in roughly 21 days there. We spent 3 nights either on planes or in airports, trying to get to our next destination. The Pacific too is, extremely hot and humid, extraordinarily humid. It made me really feel for our soldiers that fought over there in World War II. People don't really might not think about this, but what's often referred to as Guadalcanal is the primary island of Solomon Islands. And so our World War II vets fought the Japanese over there, back in World War II. Anyway, so, but I'll just say briefly that in Solomon Islands and Samoa, we found lots of seed oils present in the grocery store. So we went from grocery store to grocery store. We'd often spend an hour and a half in these grocery stores, just going through their food supply and trying to figure out, what's their food supply look like, and are they getting seed oils? And indeed they are. So in Solomon Islands, for example, I'll just tell you briefly that instead of them getting, you have to remember, let me go back here for a minute. Sorry about this. All of the Pacific Islanders, they primarily consumed coconut oil in their native traditional diets. Well, now, if these 3 islands that we visited, 4 really, if I include Fiji, they don't hardly have any coconut oil anymore, and they have a whole lot of our seed oils, and they have quite a lot of palm oil, primarily in Solomon Islands, is what we found. But they have a lot of soybean oil and canola oil, the high omega-6 oils, in their food supply. And we can come back to that.
Is it due to cost? Is it a cost thing that they can't even afford the coconuts that are in their country anymore, and they have to use cheap seed oils now?
No, I don't think so, Casey. I don't really think it's cost. I think, unfortunately, the West, the Americans and Western civilization has been promoting seed oils, as you know, for decades, because they lower cholesterol. I really think that, these islands, they're inundated with our processed foods. And what we found is lots of foods over there that look like our foods that you'd find in our grocery, our typical grocery stores like Walmart. And they're loaded with seed oils, but again, there's a lot of detail there, but in general, we'll just say that They absolutely have supplanted and replaced their coconut oil with palm oil, canola oil, soybean oil, safflower oil primarily. Isn't that about right, Suze?
Well, when I asked them, because it was just so fascinating to see that there was no coconut oil, because that's all we ever thought. They use coconut oil, of course. But when I asked them and I said, but what about the coconut oil? They said, we don't use it. And I said, well, did you ever? And according to the people we spoke with, they said, no, most of the time they use coconut milk and coconut cream to cook with. And we noticed that when we would sit to eat with them, those that were cooking with coconuts, the Wamena people, they don't really cook at all with coconuts, really. They just, it's sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes. But on the other islands, their preferred liquid or fat to cook with was the coconut milk or coconut cream. And I found it fascinating. And even in the stores, very minimal amount of coconut that we saw was being sold. It was mostly palm oil, soy, canola, sunflower, safflower, those kinds of things. So again, I think one of the biggest things that for me was they weren't cooking with coconut oil. It was the coconut milk and coconut cream, which they chose.
Right. And but the fat, that is in the coconut cream, I mean, those are extremely, the coconut cream, coconut milk, those are extremely high fat, and they just haven't separated out the oil. Excuse me. They haven't separated out the oil, but that's where they were getting their fat traditionally. Like the Tokelauans way back in the 60s and 70s, their diet was 56% fat, but 50% saturated fat. Well, where were they getting that? Coconut cream, coconut milk. Yeah, they weren't buying coconut oil or even extracting out coconut oil in any way. They were just using coconut milk. So, or coconut cream, whatever you want to call it.
And I have a video that I've attached, if you have time, to show you when we went and spent time with a traditional family. They showed us how they made it, and it was just so fascinating. It was very good. So yeah.
Wow. Very, very interesting. Now, Suze, before you left, you were kind of coming up with some ideas, hypotheses, and you were trying to decide whether you were optimistic that you were going to find that a lot of these cultures had not been touched by our civilization, but at the same time, you're also a little pessimistic. How do you feel having been there and come back? Is this as the train left the station as far as vegetable oils go in that area of the world?
It was basically what I had anticipated, because I'd heavily researched so much before we left, and it wasn't looking good. And so when Chris and I were there, it was everywhere. When we were with the Dani tribe, we aren't really sure. We're still questioning how much is there. We're thinking, Chris, what do you think? 90% we were thinking is still traditional, and maybe 10% is it's infiltrated. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, so I think that's probably about right, Suze, is my guess. The Dani tribe, again, Casey, that survives almost exclusively off of sweet potatoes. They're much like as I mentioned, like the Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta, and so their diet probably 90+% sweet potatoes, but we absolutely are certain that they're not even that population. They're not living entirely ancestrally, and we know that from their the fact that they live fairly close to Wamena. They live close, which is a small village or a city, but they live close to where they can get some processed foods out of a little shack, essentially, that sells all kinds of candies. And we're not sure if they sold vegetable oils, but that's where they're getting some candy and cigarettes from there. But the thing that, I think more than anything suggested to Suze and I that they're not completely ancestral is the fact that their children had several of them were either they were overweight or obese. One was obese. We think we we probably agreed upon. But there was also 2 children that looked like they definitely had malnutrition. They were severely malnourished. One, I think, had kwashiorkor, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but that's the condition that is a protein a protein deficiency, and leaves them with such a low level of albumin in the blood that they spill out fluid from their liver into the gut, into the belly, and it's called ascites. And so you see these children they're very, very emaciated, but they have this distended belly, which is full of fluid. And we saw one child like that. And that alone tells us that they're probably getting, we think, I mean, they're certainly not getting enough nutrients. There's no question. They're not getting enough protein. And again, it's because they live almost exclusively off sweet potatoes. They would occasionally have pork, but it's probably about once a month, because they prize their pigs and they don't kill their pigs very often. And so
and they won't kill their own pigs because they're like their pets. They cherish their pigs, and they're also full of money and currency as well. So if they're going to get married, it's exchanging with the parents of the woman they're going to marry. That becomes, how many pigs is she worth? But it was just very fascinating to see that it was so true that sweet potatoes are just such a huge part. But they do have fruit. I mean, and you'll see in the slides that there's fruit everywhere. I mean, in all the islands, it is a plethora of fruit wherever you turn, and they can just go and pick the fruit. So they do eat bananas, and they have pandan, which is a red fruit. And they've got, pineapple and just the most beautiful fruit. And we could talk about, Chris, how what we felt what it was doing for our health. Just eating the food that they had was so filled with nutrients compared to what our food sources are. They're just remarkable. I mean, what it was doing for our health when we were feeling good at a given time. So, Chris, if you want to talk about that, I don't know.
Well, I'll just say this. So among all of the Dani tribe's adults, we did not see one person who was obese. I don't think we saw one. Did we, Suze?
No, the only thing we noticed with them, well, there's a couple things we noticed is, of course, they smoke heavily. It was constant. There was smoking. And a lot of the cigarettes are brought to them, as is the candy and the junk food, by the tourists. Like I said before I left, Case, I was concerned what the tourists were bringing, and it was exactly what I had surmised. But they're aging. The women who are in their 30s and 40s, they're looking very aged, very old. Their skin, and yes, they're in the sun a lot, but they're not aging well. Their skin, they don't wear a lot of clothing, so even their skin is sagging. They just aren't aging well. And again, to me, and I hope, Chris, you'll agree with this, is that they're lacking in nutrients. I mean, you can only get so much out of sweet potatoes and the fruit that they're eating. And I just think that when we look at all of the different Native people that we get to spend time with in Vanuatu, they were just this group of this tribe that we went to spend the day with, and they were just so beautiful. Their skin, they were, this man, I've got a video of him as well, and he was just radiant and just so vibrant. He was in, maybe they don't know their ages. If you ask them how old they are, they do not know how old, because they don't keep records of how old they are. And he said maybe between 50 and 60, he might be that age. And he was just magnificent. He was considered like the warrior. He walked on hot coals. He showed us how he could do that. It didn't bother him a bit, but he was showing us that, he was just a stellar specimen. And compared to, and they eat fish. They eat a lot of fish. And so comparing that tribe of people who have a lot of fruit and vegetables, taro and sweet potatoes and things, but they also incorporate fish and chicken. And the Dani tribe do not. And so there was a big difference in health and how they're aging. And you'll see in some of the pictures I'll show, the older men, this man I mean, he was in his 90s. I think I said to Chris, maybe he was 100. I don't know, but he was so frail, just so frail. And I thought, boy, had he been eating some fish and had more protein and just, he would have been aging better. And so I think that's a great takeaway there. We need to have animal products. We'd have to, Chris.
Okay. This is fascinating. And this is a totally honest and fair question. There's tons of nuance. It's not black or white, but part of, the idea of your writing, Ancestral Diet Revolution, is that it's not necessarily the fat versus the carbohydrates per se, or plant food versus animal foods per se. It's more seed oils. Having now been to this spot, I'm asking this question on behalf of every low carb person, every carnivore person that listens to this show. Did you say seeing their health the way they were changed your opinion in any way, or did it enhance the position you already had to begin with?
Well, for me, as a former vegan, and I know how I was falling apart as a vegan, and I ate a lot of sweet potatoes as a vegan, but I ate a lot of everything else that was vegan. And I just know what now I'm mostly a meat-based person. I feel, and I've said this before, I cannot imagine not having meat so heavily in my diet, because I need that. And I think like my daughters would say that my skin when I was vegan was so thin, and they would say, it looks like old lady skin, they look at my legs and so forth. And now it's like, I feel more plump. I just feel like I'm aging so much better now compared to what I did. And it totally was verified by seeing the tribes that do not hardly have any animal compared to those that have quite a bit in their diet. Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, so it didn't change anything that I believe at all, Casey. In fact, everything we saw was supportive of what's in our book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution. So in that book, and in some of my presentations, as you know, I've reviewed the Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta that lived off of sweet potatoes, just like the Dani tribe. And Professor Sinnott and White that evaluated those Papua New Guineans, they wrote that they had terrible dentition and they had very high levels of arthritis. This is we don't know about the arthritis, and there's a very significant communication barrier, even with our guides and our interpreter. We really didn't have very good translation between us and the Dani people, but their teeth, the Dani tribe living off mostly sweet potatoes, were absolutely atrocious. They've lost a lot of teeth. Their teeth are decaying. They look rusty. They look absolutely terrible. But now I can't say anything about the arthritis in the Dani tribe, because we weren't able to really ask that question and get translation. But I'll tell you, when we took this hike up the mountain, we went with we had two guides. We have two guides, and the lady that showed us how to make salt, Suze, was it 2 or 3?
We had our porter, and we had our guide, and then we had a male Dani member and a female Dani member. And they're all heavily smoking. I mean, they're smoking even when they're walking and hiking. And we were talking about this with Chris last night. And I said, funny. I said, when I would sit in their huts with them, and I'm dying because they're smoking away. And plus they've got the fire going, and there's just so much smoke, and I'm not used to it. And I'm coughing. They're not coughing. But when we're hiking and putting in such effort, there was no wheezing. There was no coughing. They had stamina, unbelievable stamina, for being such heavy smokers. And it was remarkable. I was like,
we went up this, of course, I'm not a hiker, and I've had trouble with a knee over the past year approximately. So I'm not in the best cardiovascular shape right now, but with our 3 guides and Suze and I, and Suze has been she does a lot of running, sprinting and such. And of all of us, I was the one who was panting and gasping for breath going up this mountain. These Dani guys that that live off of sweet potatoes and smoke all the time and live in their smoke-filled houses, they were fine. They were absolutely fine. And we left it, for the level that we left at was approximately, was 1,900 meters. So whatever that is, 5,000, 5,500 feet, maybe something like that. And I think we probably went up maybe 1,500 feet. And I'm telling you what, like I said, these guys, they were very, very fit. They may not look very good in terms of their, the way they're aging, as Suze has mentioned, but they're awfully fit. Most American adults wouldn't make it up 200 feet of that hike.
Wow.
I don't think they would. It's a pretty rough hike.
Wow. Yeah, that's similar elevation to what you'd find in Boulder, right?
Yeah, it'd be about like Boulder. Yep, yeah. About the same. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So Suze mentioned the tribe in Vanuatu, and this was basically a large family, essentially.
Like a clan. Clan.
Sorry, Suze?
It's a clan. We call that a clan.
A clan, yeah. And as she mentioned, they live almost exclusively off of fruit. Maybe Suze could fill in the details here, and fish. So they get fish from the ocean. But when we talked to them, it was clear that they were consuming fish on a daily basis, and all the rest of their food came from fruit, didn't it, Suze?
Well, they have cassava and taro as well, which is like a sweet potato. So that's very big in the regions. They've all got some kind of a potato or a root vegetable of some kind. It's usually a root vegetable. And so the sweet potato was really big in Wamena, but the rest of the islands was either cassava or taro.
Yeah, that's right.
But again, and they all mix it with the coconut milk or coconut cream. But the fish was very prevalent in this clan, and they were just remarkably beautiful, just beautiful people.
When we asked the chief of this clan what they ate, I wish we could run that video, because it's not exactly in my head, but I think that he said everything he named initially was fruit or root vegetable. So I think he said something like cassava, taro, banana, papaya. I don't know what else. Maybe breadfruit. I can't remember, but it was. And then we had to specifically ask, well, what about the meat? Are any animal products? And that's when he said, well, we eat fish.
Or chicken. Fish and chicken.
Fish, yeah, and chicken, but fish almost every day. But this clan was extremely fit and healthy looking.
The children were just so beautiful and just prime. There was no illness of any kind, malnutrient going. I just was in awe of them. But I found it in all. Chris, didn't you find it in all of Vanuatu? Even when we were in the stores, the things that they were supplying in the stores, it was just such a healthier, like they're tinned fish. They live on canned fish. A lot of them live on canned fish, and here they can fish. But I think it's easier for them to get the canned fish in these little shacks that are everywhere. And in Vanuatu, we were so thrilled to see that the tinned fish, a great supply that they had was either water or spring water. It wasn't just the soybean oils and things that we had seen in the other islands so Vanuatu just seemed to be a much healthier environment. Don't you think that, Chris?
Oh, yeah. Vanuatu, it was just far healthier, and exactly as Sue said, we saw far less seed oils, a lot more palm oil, and olive oil, I think. Sue, is that right? Yep. Okay.
Yep.
And I want to mention to the listeners that the reason I was so interested in Samoa, or we were, is because Samoa is probably in the top 3 of the most obese and diabetic nations in the world. Their current obesity is around 50% in the men and 70+% in the women. I think it's And if their total obesity and overweight in Samoa is about 90%, and their diabetes was about 26%, I believe, 27%, something like that in the men, and 34% of the women. It works out to be around 29 or 30% of the adult population is diabetic in Samoa. And we were in Samoa, so we spent a lot of time in Samoa because we really wanted to understand their food supply. And in 5 full days or almost 6 days being in Samoa, I can tell you that for people over the age of approximately 25, we agreed that we saw one person who was not overweight. One.
Wow.
And she was in the airport in security. All the other adults that were over age about 25, they're all overweight or extremely obese. And there again, this is where we saw a lot less palm oil and a lot more soybean and canola oils. And again, we've told the Pacific Islanders, and when I say we, I mean the American nutrition institutions like Harvard, Tufts, Mayo, American Heart Association. We've told them that coconut oil is bad because it's high in saturated fat, and that our oils are good. And so, interestingly, one of the grocers told us that the rich people, this is his words, he said the rich people buy the soybean oil and canola oil. The poor people, they buy coconut oil. So they think it's good to be consuming our oil, the oils that we've touted as good. The very things, just like us, that are driving overweight, obesity, and heart disease and cancer and all this chronic disease. Samoa is, in general, after visiting all the grocery stores in Apia, which is the capital of Samoa, their food supply is atrocious. I would literally say that 10 or 15% of the grocery stores are dedicated to fruits, vegetables, meat, eggs, and dairy. All the rest is just loads and loads of our typical, processed foods. And as Sue said, and lots of tinned fish in soybean, canola, and cottonseed oil, I think.
And safflower and sunflower.
Sunflower, yeah.
It was just toxic. It was, and it was shocking to just see so many people that are so ill in terms of appearance wise. That we could see is just so large, and it's so not needed. It's so not necessary when you can see the difference between Vanuatu and Samoa to have such a contrast in health and in what's being sold in the stores. And it was interesting also in Jayapura, which was also in Indonesia, which was the same island as it was Wamena. When we went to the store there, again, everything was palm oil, but even their processed food, and I verified this here with the stores in my home, they're like Pringles. The Pringles there was made with palm oil. But yet the Pringles here is made with soy and safflower. And so I'm thinking, so they're able to, it's interesting that in the stores that they're like, and you hear about in the UK and so forth, that they're banning a lot of what we have in our food. It's the same thing there, that they're able to have food that is less toxic. I mean, even though palm oil, I wouldn't consume that either, because 10 to 12% LA is not something I want in my body either. I would rather have an animal fat. But it was just really interesting to see that in Samoa, it was just such, the supply of what they're getting is just so horribly toxic, and it's evident in the people. It's just so sad because they were once so healthy,
Yeah. Wow, that is very sad. Nina Teicholz writes a lot about that in The Big Fat Surprise, how all of these companies had to reformulate the products they were using because there was this huge uproar in the early 90s about, saturated fats and animal fats. And so why McDonald's had to ditch their beef tallow that they cooked all their French fries in 1991 because everybody made such a big stink about it. And there was all kinds of hilarious problems that came out of like trying to reimagine what an Oreo cookie would be like without palm oil. So it's very interesting that you notice that. I did have a question about palm oil, and I think you answered it for me. I've heard that palm oil is it's a decent oil to use, but is terrible for the environment. Is that mostly true?
That too, yeah. In the environment wise, it's what it's doing to, stripping the land and so forth.
Yeah.
There's that piece of it. But again, it's but everyone's like, yeah, but it's lower in LA and, in omega-6. No, to me, it's still too high. I would not put that in my body. Everyone says, well, it's better than the rest. I prefer to go with the best. I mean, it's animal fats.
Coconut oil is so cheap. Animal fats are inexpensive. You can get sticks of butter. Why even mess with palm oil? So that does make sense. And I did have two questions. Am I saying this right? The Vanuatu?
Vanuatu?
Vanuatu. Okay, I wasn't even close. You guys are the world explorers, not me. Okay, so you're mentioning everywhere in the area is having sweet potatoes. They're also having fruit. Fruit, I imagine, would be so low in plant toxins, generally, not harmful for people. Potatoes, you hear the story that like we think of potato, we think of russet potato. There's not russet potatoes around the world. It's something we made, and potatoes can be quite toxic. So what were some of the cooking methods that you saw people doing, cooking or eating methods that helped kind of bring down the plant toxins, something like that? Did you see any like clay being used or cooking methods, that kind of thing?
Well, first of all, let me jump in and just say that it's the sweet potato primarily in West Papua, Indonesia. The others, it's mostly cassava and taro are the root vegetables that they're consuming in the Pacific, and then lots of fruit on top of that. And I let me go back. I got to go back to this question of, about palm oil, Casey, because my impression did change a little bit about palm oil, even though, palm oil is about 10% omega-6 linoleic acid. And I actually felt stronger that, let me rephrase that. I felt that palm oil was probably one of the more healthy oils until we went there and we saw how much palm oil was being used in the Solomon Islands, and the people are not that healthy. And I really believe that that's palm oil. Susan and I talked about this a lot, and we just think that the Pacific Islanders, we know that these are one of the populations as a group. They're extremely sensitive to our processed foods and vegetable oils. And I think even the palm oil is really hazardous to them, more so than it would be to us. So that's the impression that I had. Do you want to say anything about that, Suze?
I see. I've never been, since I was little, I've just never been a processed food person. I just knew it wasn't God's plan. It wasn't natural. So I just haven't used oils in my diet, and I just don't ever think any oil. If I were going to use an oil, I might use a coconut oil, but my body can't even handle that. And we'll talk about that. It was an issue that we had with my health, but wasn't attractive. But as my father would say, that's just not attractive. But yeah, so and maybe if you can find a really good quality olive oil that had a 3% LA, which that they are out there, what we're still searching for. But so yeah, for oils, I just think I just don't, and I never have thought. I don't care what their levels are. I just think animal fat is what our bodies do well with. But what you're talking about, Case, when it comes to their cooking preparations, and this is something that I talk with Chris so much about, because I struggle so much with oxalates with my body. And I just, when we went, I said to Chris, I said, I've got a lot of my food allergies, and I'm just going to eat whatever they offer us and deal with the consequences. And they don't boil. They do not boil their food, which we've always been told. Now that we're studying all this, you got to boil the life out of them to get those oxalates and the phytates and get all that, all those plant toxins out of it. They don't do that at all. Most of the time, and I've got pictures if you want to see them, is of the Dodani tribe. They just put them in a stone fire. It's called an earthen pit. oven, and it's beautiful how they cook. And they steam them, and then we ate them, and but they do scrape very lightly the skin off, but they're still consuming some of the skin as well. You go to Vanuatu, and he said the same thing, and we have a video of him talking about that, saying we do not boil because you're taking the nutrients out. In his beautiful, he's got his dialect what he has when he's speaking, and he said we take a clam shell after it's been cooked in a stone oven like they talked about, and he says, and we scrape the skin off and then we eat it, but they don't boil it hardly at all. And then when we ate with a family in Samoa, I gotta remember where we were, Chris, when we were with Poe, remember? Mm-hmm. And his gentleman friend, his name was Livingston, and he was in his 80s, and he cooked a completely Samoan type meal for us. And it was just fascinating to watch. And of course, everything was cooked in an open pit fire because they don't have a kitchen in their home, really. They don't have a stove. They have a sink, but not a stove. It's outside, or it's cooked outside over an open fire. And everything was, quickly boiled in the coconut milk or coconut cream. And it wasn't cooked for like an hour. It was just, enough to cook the food. And things were still, still kind of had some texture to it. And so when we had, and they cook bananas, Chris, remember, they have like this big, thick kind of banana that it's very green, and they cook that just like they do with potatoes. It was fascinating, just fascinating. I thought cooking it was like how they do with plantains. We just learned so much about cooking there. But I found with me, I usually, if I have a sweet potato, I immediately have an oxalate problem. And I didn't have too much of the oxalate problem in terms of my joints and things. So I don't know if it's, again, what Chris and I were thinking, is it because the food, there is no chemicals used whatsoever, no fertilizers, no glyphosate, nothing. Everything is so grown so naturally, so to the earth of what it should have been. So I don't know. Is there a difference in their food sources? Like people say when they go to Italy that, celiacs can eat their pasta because it's so different. I don't know. Chris, what's your take on this?
Well, I agree with you completely, Suze. There's an opportunity in those islands, Casey, to eat the most incredible food you've ever had, or at least I've ever had, and I think Suze has ever had. It was I mean, I've never tasted bananas, apples,
grapefruit. These
foods were just delicious. And they're like the grape, we're used to our grapefruit that's so sour. Theirs is so incredibly sweet, and this great big fruit. And literally, there were several days that I always tell Suze, I've never missed a dinner in my life. Like I would need to be in the ICU to miss dinner, right? And there was 3 days we were over there that I had breakfast and lunch. And when dinner rolled around, I didn't even feel like eating. I just ate because Suze needed to eat. So I just thought, well, I better eat too. But this food was so incredibly satiating, I think, because the mineral content of these fruits and root vegetables is probably just astonishing compared to ours. And so I think it was just it was just so delicious and satiating. So you've got the opportunity to choose those kind of foods, like in Samoa, again, where you've got probably in the top 3 most obese and diabetic nations in the world. Those people have an opportunity to go to just drive out in the country and, harvest their own bananas and papayas and coconut right off the trees. I mean, and you can buy it in town. And I'm telling you, it's the environment there is pristine, as best as we could tell. So there, you have an opportunity to choose really, really good food there. It's just that the people don't know any different. And just like everywhere, those people are just kind of eating what's in their food supply, what's in their grocery stores and what's in their restaurants.
It was fascinating because, as Chris talked about, they have these massive, beautiful markets, farmers markets in each of the places we went. And they were just loaded with the most, I've got pictures, just massive, the size of these places. I've never seen anything like it. And the food was just, the fresh fish, because you're right there in the ocean, and yet they were talking about how expensive the fish was. They couldn't afford it. And so they were going to buy the tinned fish in the store instead. it was shocking. It was just because I just thought, well, you can just go out and go fishing, you know. And yet the Vanuatu, that's what they said. They just go down and they get their fish each day, and that's what they're eating. But the other people were saying, no, it's just too expensive. And I'm thinking, but you live right here. Why can't you all go fishing? It was a total different mindset. I don't know. It was such a learning experience to see. But the food, and for me too, like as Chris was saying, it was so nutrient dense in the minerals. I think because I don't sleep. I'm not a good sleeper. I mean, I just don't. That's probably my biggest downfall. I'm not a good sleeper. And but when I was there, it's been 30 years, I actually was sleeping and I was dreaming. I was like, oh, this is what dreaming is. And so I said to Chris, I said, I think he would say it's the minerals. A lot of magnesium probably loaded in the fruits and vegetables we were eating, but also for me, because we didn't have a lot of cell service. So I think that because they don't have a lot of the EMFs, and I'm so sensitive to it. I mean, I'll have heart palpitations if I'm near things. I'll start to lose consciousness if I'm near something too close. I'll actually start to pass out. And so there, I thought maybe it's also that the environment, and it's just so clean, it's so pure, it's so going back like 60 years ago, 70 years ago, that what we would have had. And so it was so profound. It was just such a profound experience, and we could talk for hours and hours and just share so much. It's just life altering, life changing.
Yeah. So amazing. And of course, as you guys mentioned, and the listener, whoever's watching this should always keep in mind when somebody says that a study was done, it's observational. It's what you guys did. You went and observed, you're telling the story. That doesn't tell you causation. It doesn't tell you the reason why things happen. It doesn't tell you whether it was the smoking or it was the sweet potatoes that caused maybe the skin to be off, or it could be totally different. Maybe they need more sunscreen or something ridiculous like that. So you guys were there observing, and I've been dying to ask you this question. In the more remote populations that you went to, obviously, you know, we're breaking into some of these and they're getting some processed foods or whatever. Are these people in the most remote places of the world, the places we have not yet farmed over, are they struggling for existence? Are they barely scraping by?
Yes.
Well, you know, the small clan or tribe in Vanuatu, they were thriving. They were thriving off of the land. I mean, off of what they could get from the sea and what they would get right out of these rainforests. The tribe, the Dani tribe in West Papua, Indonesia, in the highlands there, I would say they're struggling. I would not call them really successful. They're really subsistence agriculturists, but I wouldn't say that they're truly successful because, again, they probably are much like the Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta. They probably don't have heart disease and a lot of, you know, cancer or diabetes, or maybe maybe most of the chronic diseases they don't have, but they're not an example that we would want to try to emulate, right? But it is interesting that they could be in that kind of health with a diet that's almost exclusively sweet potatoes.
And their strength, they're extremely strong. The stamina, I just marveled at what the women and the men too. They're just very, very strong. And in being such heavy smokers, you know, because I know after I spent the day with them when we did the sweet potato day, I couldn't, my throat and my lungs were on fire for 2 days, and I felt like my vocal cords had been fried. And I thought, and I'm coughing and stuff. I'm thinking, how are they not coughing? How are they not? Is it because their diet is so heavy in minerals with the sweet potatoes and the fruits that they're eating? I don't know. But as you said, Case, you know, this is all observational. We are only speculating. We are only seeing what we're, you know, all through what we're seeing. And but it was amazing. And I love the fact that we can compare of all the islands, and then to which island had the most pristine health. And again, we turn to Vanuatu.
Yeah, and observation is totally valid. It is what it is. It's just observation, but it is observation. You were there experiencing it. I was wondering down to things like, were people happy? Were they very grateful? Were they warm and welcoming? Did they have bright countenances like that? Did you notice a lot of that as well?
I think the Dunny tribe, they're very protective. I think they're when we entered you just spend the time with them, they're congenial, very congenial, beautiful people. I think everyone was kind of the same way. But the more we were with the chief of the Dunny tribe, and he was just very gracious. And he even let me, which is usually like taboo, a woman should not be going into the men's hut. And he let me go in. He said, "You can come in." I was like, "Oh." So when Chris is in there sitting with him, he goes, "You can come in." I was like, "Oh." So he was very, very receptive to that. And then on I went the second day to the Dunny tribe, and it was a different tribe. It was a smaller little tribe. And they were very receptive and very, very caring. And I think because they saw me, I wanted to help them. So I was pitching in to help what they were doing. I think that meant a lot to them. But to see the men, I thought that the men that day I was with them, they were very caring and nurturing to me. And if they felt there was something in my hair, I was like standing there and I felt something happening in the back of my head. And I turned to go, "Something in your hair," and they're trying to take it out of my hair for me. And
That's amazing.
They were just so receptive and kind. And when it came time to eat, I had 2 sweet potatoes that day, and one was they had one that was just stuck right in the fire that was in the kitchen of the hut. And so we were sitting in that hut while we were waiting for the other sweet potatoes. Everything's around sweet potatoes. While the ones outside were cooking, we were on the inside sitting in, because this is where I'm breathing in all their smoke. And one of the potatoes, and so one of the tribesmen, he reached in and got the potato for me, and he broke it open and he set it in front of me, and he was showing me how to eat it. And then when we got outside, time to eat and so forth, it was the same thing. They were breaking it and offering things to me, and it was just very much that the men were taking care of me. It wasn't that the women were, but the men were just sitting right around me and offering me. And then they made the pandan fruit, which is red fruit. And they squeezed they didn't eat the seeds, but they squeezed the juice out of it. And here, try this. And it was just, I found the men to be just very gracious and very just very loving. And it was, and at the end, it was like I didn't want to leave. They were so kind and just so wonderful.
That's awesome. So for the listener, Suze is recommending definitely next time you're at the grocery store, if you see a stranger that's got something in their hair, it's a very very kind gesture to just reach in there, grab it out for that person. That's wonderful. So you both have mentioned a few mishaps that happened while you were down there, a missed flight, Chris with your knee and getting a little ill. Suze, what was your story? What did your dad call it? It's not attractive.
It just wasn't attractive. But I've had this problem my whole life, and Chris is getting used to it. So
this may not be a topic for any podcast.
Yeah. I'm very willing to share. I'm very willing to share that I have issues with my health, and I have celiac disease, and I have other food allergies. So that's why I have to be very careful what I eat. But so when we were there, the first thing that happened to my situation was when we got done hiking, it was that spring mountain. It was kind of causing us a problem. So with Chris with his knee, and then I looked at my legs when we got back, and I had these red dots, and I have a fear of always getting poison ivy because I'm very highly allergic to poison ivy. So I kept taking pictures of the foliage and the plants as I was going along to make sure I was identifying any of the plants. Am I going to have a reaction? But nothing looked like poison ivy. And there wasn't really any mosquitoes. I didn't see any insects around. But I did go into the pond, the salt spring. I did go in to help her with that as well. And so anyway, so I had these red dots, but they weren't itching. So I thought, well, it can't be poison ivy. But then when we got to Solomon Islands, my legs started they were just horrible. They just swelled up, and it was the itching and the burning. It was worse than poison ivy. So Chris was just so awesome. He was putting all these creams on my legs and just helping me. And I could think, what if it's scabies? What if I got scabies here? And you're going to get scabies. And he just didn't care. He was just being so kind and just so beautiful. And it was just so wonderful. And And so that was one issue. But then the other issue, the big issue I had was that we weren't sure what I was eating, because sometimes when I would ask for the meat, and if it was ground beef, it tasted to me, I kept saying to Chris, it tastes like there's something in it. It was kind of doughy, like they put grains or something. And if there was any kind of grain in it, that's not going to do well for someone with celiac. Or if it had spice, if there was just something that I was like, oh. And so we weren't sure. And I also have an issue with coconut. And so a lot of the food that they would make us would have coconut milk or coconut cream, or I even drank coconut water. And so from that point on, I was having like chronic diarrhea. And it wasn't attractive, but I'm so good at handling that, because that's all I've had my whole life, that it wasn't impacting too much of what was happening, because, you know, I just could control what was happening. But I lost 7 pounds.
Wow.
And that's not good, because I'm trying to gain weight, not lose it. So I'm down to 105 and I'm 5'8" now. And so I'm trying to gain it back again. So that was another problem that I had. And then another thing I had is because of the constant, Chris started with it a little bit, but then his went away and mine didn't, is my ear. I kind of lost the hearing in my left ear because of the ear pressure in the cabins when you're constantly taking off and landing. So I'm hoping that eventually that'll come back. So those are my health issues. And Chris,
yeah, not bad.
Chris, what were your issues?
No, I think we covered, well, yeah. So you know, I did kind of re-injure this knee, but anyway, that it is what it is, and then I just caught a bronchitis toward the end. I sat right next to a guy on a flight from Fiji to Vanuatu, a guy that was coughing all the way. He was right across the aisle from me, and anyway, so yeah, I came home with bronchitis. So so I'm the one coughing still a little bit, you know. None of the Donny tribe people that smoke, you know, they never coughed, as Sue said. They are perfectly fine.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Few battle wounds, not bad.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
What a journey. It's just absolutely remarkable what you guys were able to do and see. I'm wondering, as now you've had a bit of time to reflect on things, process the trip, and again, kind of reflect, what are some of your biggest takeaways that you're bringing home from this trip?
Go ahead, Suze.
Oh, it was just, oh golly, where do you start? I think as a researcher, I'm still trying to battle over the big dilemma that you see on social media between plants having so many toxins and oxalates. That was really hard for me. And I talk with him about this all the time, that how can they be eating so many oxalates like I was doing, you know, as a vegan, and yet most of them are thriving and I wasn't. You know, is it because they have a healthier microbiome, because they don't have the glyphosates and they don't have all the toxic chemicals that have killed off their gut microbiome, and they've still got, Chris, what is it? Is it oxalobacter? What's the gut microbiome?
Oxalobacter.
Oxalobacter, yeah, that one he just said.
Oxalobacter.
Yeah, he's got a lot. Chris has a lot in his gut. I have none, and because we've had ourselves tested. And so, do they have a plethora of those specific wonderful microbes that are able to help to remove the oxalates from their body? And those of us here in the United States, are we deplete because we have such a toxic environment? I don't know. So these are things I'm going to really be delving into more, because it's just amazing to see the Vanuatu people who eat so much cassava and taro that are loaded with oxalates and the plant toxins, and yet they're pristine. They are pristine in their health, what we could see. And yet, but they were having the fish and the chicken and so forth. So that was something that I'm still questioning. I think it was interesting that they are not cooking with coconut oil, that they're opting to do the coconut milk and coconut cream, which I thought was quite beautiful. And a lot of them are just making it themselves. But to see so much seed oil, so much of what we have in our stores, the garbage, the junk food everywhere, that was shocking, just shocking. But again, I thought that would happen, and it came to fruition. Chris, what's your take?
Yeah, so big takeaways. I'll keep this short. I know we're running out of time here, Casey, but big takeaways. If the 4 islands, Solomon Islands, Samoa, Vanuatu, and Fiji, are indicative of the rest of the Pacific Islands, they've all got seed oils, and they're significant in the food supply. Ultimately, our goals are not to just, sorry about that, they're not to just evaluate these people superficially, which is rather what we did on this trip. This was really a fact-finding mission, to investigate where we could go back and do further research and scientific research. So there is a population that is very similar to the population we described in Vanuatu that's so healthy. And I don't know what island that is. Suze probably remembers, but anyway, it's possible that we could go back there and evaluate that population, which we think is something like 500 people that are living entirely ancestrally on an island that is a territory of Vanuatu. So that could be very much like what Staffan Lindeberg did with the Catawba studies. Remember, I don't know if you know, Casey, but he lived with the Catawbans for 6 weeks back in 1991, I believe it was. And that's where we got all that information about the Catawbans, which, again, they're South Pacific Islanders that live very much like the people in Vanuatu. And so that would be one of my goals that would come would follow this little expedition that we did.
That is so fascinating to think about. It's interesting to think back on Weston A. Price, and I think of you guys as modern day Weston A. Price type explorers, and just to know that those populations are so far and few between now. We really can't get a good observation. To hear you guys describing some of these tribes that are basically untouched, yet they're still having seed oils in their diets. It's finding the way through, and that's, again, that cat has left the bag and is probably not going to turn around. But I just, to both of your points, it's interesting that we spend so much of our time and money and effort now with what we call like health hacks, and we buy saunas and we buy cold plunges and we do grounding mats and all of these things. And it's like we're spending all this time and energy trying to hack our way back to how we are as a species. And I strongly believe that I like a carnivore diet. It works really well for me. I do not believe I would need a carnivore diet if I lived in a natural environment and had access to all of those foods and all of those nutrients. I think it's something that some people have to do now, get really extreme with their diets because of all this other crap and garbage and glyphosate, like you mentioned, like all these chemicals that we just can't get away from. You guys, this has been fascinating. My jaw has been on the floor the whole time. I love how dynamic and interesting the story was. I love your takeaways. What an amazing, cool adventure. I hope it's the first of many, and I hope you guys will come back as many times as you go out to tell us about the expedition you're going to go on, make some hypotheses, and then come back afterwards to recap the story. I just think it's way, way, way super cool. And I just really appreciate both of you. Always really complicated it, aligned schedules with 3 different people in 2 different time zones. So I appreciate all the effort that you guys went through to make this happen. So where can people go to find you guys and connect with your work? Chris, let's start with you.
It's better to start with Suze, but let's just do that. Go ahead, Suze. Go ahead. She runs the social media, so I'll let her talk.
I'm not that good at it. But anyway, so you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, which was Twitter, and also on YouTube. And I'm hoping that this week I'll have a new YouTube channel up that will be Ancestral Health Foundation, and that will have, once I learn how to edit the nudity from the tribes and not get taken down, I'll put all of our videos on as well, and also Chris's previous presentations, and all of the interviews that we're having will be on this new YouTube channel, so that'll be out as well. And of course, you can find Chris all over YouTube. But yeah, so on Instagram, Facebook, and X, we have our pages on for Fountain of. You can either do Cure AMD, or you can have Ancestral Health, but that's probably the one to go to, is Ancestral Health Foundation. Yeah.
Perfect.
And I just want to mention, I just like to mention that we would love for people to buy our new book called The Ancestral Diet Revolution. There we go, sitting right there. And I want to mention that Suze and I both do not accept royalties from this book. The royalties go to these nonprofit organizations, Ancestral Health Foundation and Cure AMD Foundation, which we're not paid by these organizations at all. So we both volunteer our time in this health and nutrition arena because we believe in what we do, and we're here because we want to bring a message about health to the world as much as we can. So anyway, Casey, thank you so much for helping us to get to spread this message, and we'd love for people to get the book and spread the message, and help us to reach the world. I mean, it's just amazing that, sometimes an elevator pitch can change somebody's entire life and save their life, literally, by telling them just with, enthusiasm about this information.
And also it's a great gift for Christmas coming up, the gift of health. In this book is a tremendous wealth and plethora of information to change your life. It could just extend your life, and you wouldn't. Just to have the gift of life is the greatest gift you can give anyone. And
I love that.
And if you want to be one of our warriors and help us on this mission, we have a donation page. Eventually we'll have also an Ancestral Health Foundation website coming up soon, but on Cure AMD, there's a donation page because people are saying, well, where could we donate? So for right now, that would be the place to go, cureamd.org, and there's a donation page, and you can click right on, and we greatly appreciate it.
That's amazing. Well, the book is so well done. You can see it here. It's absolutely beautiful. It is very thick. Please, if you're watching, if you're listening, do not buy the black and white version. Buy the color version. Buy the hardcover. It is worth it. It is such a beautiful book. It makes such a cool impression seeing all these graphs in color. So it's worth the money to be able to do that. Chris and Suze, again, what a wonderful journey and adventure you've been on. Thank you so very much for taking the time to come on our show today and share your message. We just really appreciate you both and can't wait to see what the future holds for both of you.
Thank you so much, Casey. And thank you, everybody out there listening. We appreciate all of you.
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.